So my name is Blair Simmons. I will start by saying what I am not, which I believe is a lot of what you guys are. I am not an archaeologist and I'm not an Egyptologist, but I will be talking about these matters regardless. But what I am is a 3D specialist, a sculptor, a playwright, and a master's student at NYU Gallatin. For today, for you all, I shall only be a 3D specialist. My MA program is focused around using innovative technologies and their practical applications in art making and conservation. In this project, I am more specifically studying technology's cultural and environmental impact, where it succeeds and where it fails. So, as the only digital technology specialist ever invited to the Institute of Fine Arts Egyptian Abydos Archaeological Excavation, I had the opportunity to develop a new area of my own practice while also reframing and extending the established methods of this archaeological mission. And so what I'm referring to when I'm talking about greening archaeology is two things, which can be elaborated on. But one of those things is distance studying, so like distance studying of artifacts and of architecture. And then also the democratization of information, and so talking about access. So not everybody has fellowships and can travel all around the world to go see these artifacts, and so one of my goals going in was really to create an online open source database of 3D models for people around the world to study and use for their own practices. So I'm interested in greening archaeological practices. Archaeology is often a destructive practice of studying human history and prehistory through the excavation of sites and the analysis of artifacts and other physical remains. During archaeological digs, there are various physical incursions made into the landscape by anything from a small gardening trowel for scraping back dirt to a large pickaxe for breaking up larger sections. If environmental studies aims to build the world back up in opposition, archaeology can be seen as literally tearing it apart, but it's not all terrible, I swear. It's just the way I read that sentence. While technological advancements are often seen as environmentally problematic, in the case of archaeology, it may actually be the solution. I've always been enamored by archaeology, but have always been struck by two of the biggest problems for me. You have to break up the existing ecosystem and the existing landscape to learn anything about the past, and the people who, and in addition, the people who run archaeological dig sites often, well, though this has actually been fixed in more recent years, go into foreign countries and are digging up another group's cultural remains and then take them with them. Now, the problem with fixing that is that those artifacts actually end up in warehouses that don't get to leave the country a lot. And so for this site in particular, we have many, many artifacts that can't leave and can't be studied. Which is great because it's not leaving the country, but bad for academics, who cannot come and study. So again, the goal of my project is to make that more accessible. And I'll return to these points later. But now I have a series of slides that will both contextualize my methodological and theoretical approach to my work in Egypt, but they will also serve the purpose of validating my standing here and talking to you. But really, I want to show you that my three-dimensional work is both interdisciplinary and not at all industry-specific. As a specialist in this field, I'm able to work on many different kinds of projects. This was my first archaeological project, which was pretty exciting and cool. Okay, so this is another example of the type of work I've done. This was a project with Neri Oxman at MIT. They needed a 3D scan of Bjork. We did a body scan, and they built this mask off of that body scan, and this mask only fits her. So that's another example of some types of things that I've done. And I've worked with this photographer, Dean West. He has had me create a bunch of flower pots that are all warped and weird and strange, and then he puts them into photographs and displays them in front, and this is gold plated, but it's plastic underneath. This is some of my own work. So I went into this archaeological mission with a lot of art experience and a particular view about how to use this technology, but the reality of the situation is I had never had to think about objects in real space and time. So with 3D, things are often scalable, right? So you can scan an object and make it as big or as small as you want. But with archaeology, you really need to think about it as like, it exists, this table exists right here in this space and time, and these are the real dimensions, so that you can actually really study it accurately from afar. So that included a lot of working with the people who do ArcGIS, taking like ground coordinates, doing a lot of measurements and a lot of fun things that I have never had to do before. I've also worked with a lot of doctors and engineers on knee implant tolerance testing and turning MRI data into surgical training devices, but those are not as Googleable and I don't have images of them. So we'll move on. So this is Abydos. This is the Shuna Malazib, and it is a beautiful, beautiful ancient building. I was told that they don't know if this or some other thing is the oldest like mud brick structure in the world. So it's really important, but it's falling apart. There are a lot of sparrows eating away at it, and so it's a really, really huge conservation project. So the diversity of applications I've explored over the last 5 years has allowed me to think about archaeological methods of documentation and conservation from a unique angle. So if you asked me 5 months ago to tell you about Abydos and the Shuna al-Zabib depicted here, I would have elegantly informed you that they was both very cool and very old. And that was about it. That's what I would have said. But now that I know more, I can tell you guys a bit about the site. So this is the North Abydos Expedition. It's an archaeological project sponsored jointly by the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University, and Princeton University. And the goal of the expedition is to tell the story of Abydos and its 5,000-year-old history. The archaeological area of Abydos is a vast complex covering 7 square kilometers. In its scale and complexity, one can think of it as something akin to the expansive multi-component site of the Mayan and classical worlds. The expedition's research area in North Abydos encompasses the ancient core of the site, including the ancient town of Abydos and its chief institution, the Temple of Osiris. The vast and intricate cemeteries that blanket the low desert overlooking the town and temple, and which include the great royal monuments of Egypt's earliest kings, and the great processional route of the Festival of Osiris, along with which generations of ancient pilgrims made their way from the Temple of Osiris to the symbolic tomb at Umagab, which is way back here. In an annual event that put Abydos at the center of Egyptian cultural life at the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. The archaeological record of North Abydos spans the entire history of ancient Egypt from the pre-dynastic to late antique. But the history of Abydos did not end in antiquity, far from it. Many centuries of life have unfolded in and around the ancient remains of this sacred place. From the time of the pharaohs up to our time, Abydos today is part of a vibrant rural community neighboring the towns of Beni Mansour and Al-Araba al-Funa, in addition to the archaeological area of North Abydos. The greater Abydos site complex also encompasses the archaeological areas of Umagab on the western edge of the Low Desert, where the kings of Egypt's first dynasties were buried. The iconic and beautifully decorated New Kingdom temples of Seti I and Ramses II, the funerary complexes of Akhmosa in South Abydos, and another expansive cemetery field adjacent to the ancient town known as the Middle Cemetery. So this is pre-pyramid burials. So this is kind of the beginning. This is the beginning of kingship and the beginning of this burial ritual. So what was I doing in Abydos? Oh, that's the house that we stayed at again. I just like these pictures. So this is me working as well as Ayman. We split up the photography work. The technologies that we chose actually involves a DSLR. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's called Photogrammetry. And what you can do is you can take like 100 or 1,000 photos of an object in camera raw, and you rotate around the object, and you're actually able to generate a 3D scan based off of those photographs. What's really great about this, in opposition to LiDAR or other more expensive technologies, is that you really can access it in a way that with these giant machines you can't. This is like, this I was able to go to Abydos, and if I never go back, I've created, a structure for people to, if they have a camera, they can do this same type of work. So that's really important, the accessibility of the technology. So, so there's two reasons that 3D scanning is great for archaeology, and one is distance studying, and the second is the democratization of information. So this is a seal impression. What a seal impression is often, it's mud, and it is placed on an object or a door. And what's complicated about these objects is that they are very dynamic. Often if it's on a jar, they get broken off. And so when you find a seal impression, it's difficult because how do you illustrate something that is both round and decorated on all sides, and on the other side there's the impression of a rope or the impression of a doorknob. And so it's hard to illustrate, it's hard to photograph. You can't see what's on, on all sides of the thing unless you have like 10 photographs of it for proper study. So this is like a prime example of something you would want to 3D model or 3D scan. So we were working with these small objects as well as larger architectural structures. So this is one of the 3D scans of the seal impressions. If it would be more fun if it was, if I could rotate it for you and you could actually see that it is in 3 dimensions, but I'm showing it to you in 2. My apologies. But yes, so this is an early dynastic seal impression. That's just the front and the back, or the tags. But again, so this is a doorknob right here. This is a doorknob. I should use the laser. This is the doorknob, and I believe this is kind of the metal pole that it was like ancient security systems. You're able to lock the door. Okay, so what's great about this is that we 3D scanned about 15 seal impressions, and these will all go online, and they are scaled properly. They're the right size, so when you download them, you can measure them, and you can also you can zoom in and you can see the geometry. You can take the color information off. Oftentimes, conservationists actually use 3D scanning so that you can create packing material that is fitted specifically to that object. So that's good. Let's see. So this is another example of something that kind of came up that we weren't expecting. So this is a painted coffin, a wooden painted coffin that was destroyed by many, many bugs. And about to fall apart. Like, you can't really take this out of the ground and put it into the magazine and store it as it is. So we were able to 3D scan it in various states of excavation before it literally fell apart and was taken apart in pieces and stored as such. And so if anyone ever decided to do their PhD on this object and wanted to put it back together, you have real 3-dimensional documentation of this object. So that is another good example. Okay. Oh, and then this is an example of without the color information, able to look at the geometry of the object. And this is actually what's really different than, just normal photography. You're able to study the shape of a thing, which is great. So, okay, now I'm going to do a lot of reading again, sorry.
Blair?
Yeah?
Just maybe a little slow, because not everyone's first language English, maybe.
You are right.
Blair, just a little.
Yeah?
Slow.
Mm-hmm. So sorry. You guys okay? Yeah. Okay, so, excavation is at the heart of all of archaeology. It's how we see into the past. But any excavation is only as good as the body of knowledge and understanding it supports through documentation, conservation, outreach, and publication. That's because archaeology as a field of science is inherently destructive. To excavate sites and objects buried in the past and learn from them in the present, we have no choice but to disturb the very context in which they are preserved. It is not until the late 19th century that archaeologists like Flinders Petrie began to systematically look at sites and objects in context, and not just to see the objects themselves, but the information associated with them in situ as valuable to our study of the past. So, at a time when archaeology's early pioneers were looking for new ways to document the process of excavation through field notes, illustration, artifact registration. Photography became one of their most important tools. The documentation of excavated features and artifacts in situ was a key difference that separated scientific from non-scientific artifacts, archaeology. So essentially what Flinders Petrie did is we'll go back, he really professionalized archaeology in a way that it didn't really have before. It wasn't just like an object that existed in a museum elsewhere. He was able to say, like, this is where I found it, and this is what it looked like, and this is the size it was, and you can study an object based off of its context in this situation. So it meant, for example, that the data associated with objects in context could also be preserved in the archaeological record, rather than separated and ultimately lost as objects moved from sites to museums. So these are just a lot of fun pictures. But it's, you know, these are people documenting in different, these are contemporary documentation. So this is the beginning of it all. And then this is contemporary documentations of the Shuna falling apart. We're doing a lot of photography with measuring and whatnot, and the illustrations. But also what my work allows people to do is take the 3D scans and do a lot of this like laborious task doing later. You can do it later. Though it doesn't really replace like sitting in front of a wall and drawing every single feature. I would never say that it does that, because there are always going to be problems with the representation, right? But in theory, you are able to do it after the season is over. So more photos. Okay, actually, I'll go back. So photographic documentation in particular, revolutionized archaeological field work by providing the most accurate visualization of archaeological context possible. 3D scanning and LiDAR and whatever other technology you can think of are primarily new ways of documenting and visualizing information. So while we get very, very close to precise representation, I would never say that it is the thing itself. It is not. But anything like photography, illustration has like a margin of error. Like an illustration has the margin of error of the thickness of the pencil, right? And so that exists in this work as well. Great. So this is actually a bit of a side note. This is another thing that came up while I was there that I wasn't anticipating, but some of you may be familiar with orthorectified photography, which is a way to take a photograph without perspective, without warping. And so we did a lot of tests with 3D scanning to see like how long of a wall we could make completely flat for the sake of illustration. So in the step-by-step process, for those of you who have a little bit of interest in this, is you photograph the wall. This wall, I think, was about 200 photos of this wall. This is just one of them. And then you align all the photos. And when you align all the photos, you end up with these things called tie points. And then you get the dense cloud. And so we're looking more like the wall every day. And then this is the mesh, and this is the orthorectified photo. So this is this wall completely flat, so that the illustrators and the conservators who were about to come in and like chop it off and put new mud bricks on it so that they can preserve this wall and keep it upright, had like a real documentation of what it was and what it looked like before they did that. I should have brought photos of what it looks like now. It looks very different. Thank you. I will tell you my thoughts about these things. So NYU invited me because of my digital modeling expertise to create and execute a 3D scanning program at Abydos. But as I've mentioned, my academic question led me to ask if there's a future where these technological advances, 3D scanning, LiDAR, and etc., will eventually allow us to drop the word excavation from the definition. And now, I'm gonna wax poetic a little bit, we can leave, can we leave artifacts and architectural structures undisturbed? Is it possible to study ancient artifacts without ever touching them, without ever moving them, without ever changing the landscape? Is it possible to preserve the cultural heritage of an archaeological dig site and post our research online for all to see? Archaeology is important because it allows us to learn about the past, but there has to be a future where we are able to study it from a less destructive distance. So I am not an archaeologist, but I am a technologist and a conservationist, and I see myself as a bridge between practices, and I will continue to use these opportunities and projects to establish the best practices for the future of non-destructive archaeology. So thank you.
Thank you, Blair, for your lecture. It was very interesting, and I think there's a lot of questions, so maybe I will open the floor. So, do you have any questions?
I think it's very interesting. It's not a question because it's very interesting, and I think that it is good to keep the archaeological site as they are personally. So I think that if it can reach the state that they can stay in protected in their area, I think it will be a big step forward.
Yeah, and we're definitely like not there yet, but we're close, and
that would be wonderful.
And that's like exciting. Yeah.
And thank you for your work to lead to that way, because I think that we can feel it much more if those sites stay as they are, rather than seeing it. Because at the beginning I was questioning myself, what is the use to have it? Because you lose the energy of the piece if you see it only on the 3D.
Absolutely.
But I think that it will, your approach is it's going to be leading to a way that we can study it on the side, and we can, without disturbing it, and study it exactly as they are in 3D, which is wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Did you ever?
So do you ever do like like let's just say for that head that they were actually doing the design in, you do not actually do the entire head where you would replace all the parts that are missing and almost have something on, digitized where you actually do it digitally instead of by hand,
Well, so we can do that. So it's interesting, actually that head is interesting because it is mounted on something, right?
Yeah.
So that, they're doing their best, but inherently like that's just disruptive a little bit of the pieces of the thing. So I actually can do, and will be doing, some virtual reconstructions of objects. So if I have all the pieces, I can 3D scan them and virtually assemble them and see where things fit. So yeah, but again, it's complicated because I have a lot of respect for archaeologists and the work that they do, and I would never say that my work replaces a lot of the jobs and the tasks that are done in archaeology. It is only there to augment the work that's already being done. So that's important, I think, to be thinking about,
So it's true that now I think almost all excavation use photogrammetry, as you show, and restitution, and it's very useful for conservation, for presentation to the public, also to study it. But I cannot see how it's possible to replace excavation, because, as you said, what is important for archaeology, and it's to study in context. So if you don't excavate, you will not have the context.
Absolutely. So I don't think I made it clear, but so photogrammetry works in a very similar way to photography does, obviously. So if you can see it with the camera, then it's in the scan. But there are technologies that are being developed that allow you to use sonar and LiDAR is similar. All of those technologies are able to look at objects and everything underground and really analyze things from afar. And I guess while we're not doing that work here. I do like to think about this as hopefully being a part of that narrative.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting
Yeah.
to study on a large scale, for example,
Yeah,
because you will have a global view of a site,
yeah.
and you can plan also excavation because you will have an idea of what is
Right,
underground. But
right, like a less disruptive excavation. No, and I mean, the idea of replacing excavation is again a bit of a waxing poetic situation, but as someone who thinks very theoretically about these technologies, to think about changing the approach and saying, like, do we have to excavate? Do we have enough information? If we don't, sure, let's excavate. But is there a world in which we've learned enough from all these various technological approaches? I don't know the answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about the storage of the picture and of the 3D model you took? Because as you said, you've
They're
taken
huge files.
of pictures.
They're huge files. In fact, I can't show you guys most of the stuff that I am doing because it's on a 12 terabyte drive that is getting shipped back to New York. So a lot of that work, actually, a lot of the processing I am going to be doing back in New York. So we had to prioritize what was important for us to be studying in the field. So our approach was, if we have, if we've documented the thing or the object or the building, if we've documented it and we know that we have good photos and we know that they're going to run well, and nobody needs it now, we will do it later. We have NYU's purchased, and this is getting into way too specific, but an Alienware tower that is like high processing power. So when we were in the field, we actually had a really great gaming laptop, but it's not the same as the processing power of the tower. But you really do need to have like huge, impressive equipment to be doing this work well. Like, it's easy to do this work poorly. Like, you don't really need a DSLR. I could use my iPhone and take a bunch of photos, but you would end up with like the worst 3D scan ever. It would look like a blob. So it's really like if you feed the photogrammetry software trash, it will make trash. So you really have to be a good photographer to do this work well.
But I understand that you don't have time because you have many things to do and the day on the field is really short. But how could you be sure that you have all the picture, all the data, everything necessary to do the 3D model later in New York? How could you be sure that the process will be done in a proper way? As for example, the mud brick wall, well, I mean, you're a specialist for sure. That's not the question, but it's really difficult to take the bricks, to have a good idea of the bricks, especially a mud brick wall in that state of preservation. So how will you be sure that you have the good picture?
That I have every single detail.
Yeah. If you
I will
do
never
process later,
I will never have every single detail, but there is, we had a surveyor who was working alongside me. And so again, it's not the replacing of the work. And she would never do the work for that mud brick wall back in New York. She has to be on site in order to say, like, oh, that dark spot in the scan is like a sparrow's nest. I would,
And how would we do, because it's a problem now for archaeologists to have so many pictures because it's very heavy, and it's like documentation. More you have, more you can be submerged by documentation, and you will lose information. And so now it's, if we need a hard disk for a campaign, it's we have to think also.
No, it would be impossible.
So do you have begin to think to a solution, because we have this problem of archives and not to lose all this data.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard because it's kind of like archive fever, right? It's like you really do, in choosing what to document, you're choosing what the history is. You have, there's like a level of bias involved in that kind of choice. And I mean, that's just kind of the truth of the matter anyways. Like, you know, when a sherd comes out of the ground, like you're like, oh, is this a diagnostic sherd, or is it going into the fields and are we throwing it away? It's kind of, I mean, it's the same thing, right? It's like you have a certain amount of file space and you have to choose what you think is important.
But do you think, because it's not possible when you have the 3D model to throw away all the pictures, you have to keep it.
Yes, you do have to keep the photos.
So it's how can you manage with all this documentation?
I mean, right now we have the 12 terabyte drive and we have a mirror of the 12 terabyte drive.
So we have
And next year we will probably buy another 12 terabyte drive. I mean, it's complicated because it's hard to answer that question because, you know, I'm not a specialist in file storage, but, you know, like the cloud and the file storage will continue to evolve and get better and better as all technology. So it's hard for me to answer that question.
I think we have to think about it because
Well, it is
of course
important.
we have to document and what you do it's great and very necessary.
Yeah.
But I think it's a part of the process to think about archives because it's the mistake we did with archaeologists.
Yeah.
And now we have problem because we lost a lot of data from previous excavation. So because we know we usually do this mistake, it would be nice not to do it now. So
Yeah, we always have a backup. I mean, you just have 2 drives. But I mean, it is important to think about, right? It's like, you know, if you have something on a CD-ROM, you have to move it over, right? And so like I mean, in order to have documentation of things, and if you're not going to have an object or a building right in front of you, it's important to think about. I mean, it's the reality, I think, of all of this work, not just mine, is that, you know, what do you save, and how do you save it, and how do you keep saving it, like, and how do you preserve it for the future? You know, books fall apart too.
yeah.
So,
How are you actually shooting? Is everything freehand, or are you using a grid system and you've got a camera on a rail and you know?
it's a great question. Freehand. But actually that's not true. I do a little bit of everything. For the large structures, freehand. There's a lot of, also there's a really long pole that we use. That is a very funny photo of me with this giant pole. And the way that we make sure that these exist in real time and space is I work with the ArcGIS specialists to take in ground coordinate points so that everything is like geotagged, so that it's not like this, you know, like the shoe net is like this way. All the ground coordinate systems like allow for, you know, essentially like this orthorectified work. It's tough in Abydos in particular because we use a local coordinate grid. So there's like a lot of converting of the local coordinate points to like the global coordinate points. But that just took about like...
So for the wall, you didn't use like a rail system and you would mount your camera and you would slowly, you know, so you'd keep your dimensions exactly the same and then, you know, bump up to the next grid of that. It was all done freehand? Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it doesn't need to be like, that's really important if you're doing like orthorectified photography through like that Photoshop stitching method, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes, no, we don't have to do that because the camera positions are also like the software acknowledges where the camera is and how far away it is from an object. So yeah. Anyways.
So, Blair, I have a question. So, are you able now to take that 3D image and then print it?
Yeah.
Can you print that wall?
Yeah. You could.
You can also create the wall, right, in 3D,
Mm-hmm.
like as actual as it is.
Yeah, some people are actually doing a lot of recreations of that, and I forgot the name of the man, but he recreated like a tomb because too many people were breathing on it, and so for tourists, he recreated it and just put it somewhere else. It's a lot of work, but and it doesn't happen like magic. Like it's not like 3D printing houses in Japan warehouses, but it's but when you have the data, you can absolutely recreate it. Yeah. Yeah. I saw someone.
How do you choose the objects to take into the 3D?
It's a good question. As not an archaeologist and not an Egyptologist, the director decides. But okay, so there's really like 3 real reasons.
The complete objects, the nice one like this mask, but for instance, you show earlier the scenes, impressions. It's really difficult to read them. So, do you take the reader one? So you could make like an image, or do you take the fragments and you add different lines, so you could make it readable by the specialists?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's you're right. There's like a few different reasons why you would want to 3D scan something, and it's hard. It's hard to know exactly which one you need and why based off of like what you're studying, right? So it's like what are you trying to do? Are you trying to prove that like this stela, like that half of it is in a museum in Paris and half of it is in this warehouse in Egypt? Are you trying to prove that those 2 things go together? Yeah, you scan those 2 things. Are you trying to show that these particular pieces of the seal impression like fit in a particular way, and you want to show the script and the narrative? I mean, the thing about this work, and I think it's easy to think about it as like incredibly scientific and specific, and it is, but also at the same time, like it's storytelling, it's data visualization. So it's like an aesthetic and academic choice. Yeah. I hate to answer your questions in such a vague way, but like that is really how I feel about it. Is that there isn't a right way. There's no right way to decide. Yeah, like what's the most important thing? It's hard with a site this big, especially like, I'm only one Blair, so it's like how much time do I have, and how many things are there, and what's the most important and to who? I kind of, as a tech specialist, I really am a team member, and I answer to all of the different like head excavators, So, yeah.
And so just for an idea, how long were you there, and how many pictures?
I was there for 2 months. I was there for 2 months, and I flew straight here. And tonight I fly to New York. Let's see, what did I do? I did about...
How many walls and how many impressions?
We did 20 walls, 4 excavations, like full excavations, 50 objects. Some of them were in museums, some of them were in warehouses, and some of them just came out of the ground, or were coming out of the ground and were gonna fall apart. So it was really, because I was new to this project and they were new to me, we really did do like a range of small to big. This is really like, you're seeing the beginning of me trying to process this information. This was beta, beta mode. So yeah, but I hope does that answer?
Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, maybe I would like to share this question. You were saying that the camera knows how far away you are from the object, or do you have to define the object first to make that possible?
Define it. You actually, technically in the software that I'm using, you don't need geotagging of the camera positions. It can figure it out on its own. There's enough metadata in the lens, and it takes in the light information, and there's a lot of science and math, and then it decides, this is how far away the camera is from the object. But when you say define the object, do you mean, what do you mean?
Like, to define how far away you are from the object.
No,
You don't have to have a sense.
You actually don't have to. You can.
Is it working with GPS, or is that?
We do, but you don't have to. Yeah. It's not a requirement of the software. The alternative to not using geotagging with the camera is to put like a scale in the 3D world, just anywhere, and say like, this is a meter long, and then the whole thing scales appropriately.
But then you would have to do that with every picture, no? Like it works.
No, not with every picture, with like 3 pictures, and then it registers the other photos based off of that. We're getting into specifics. I'm going to start talking file types, which is boring.
So what is the file type?
Well, it's a really good question. Are you talking about the photographs, or are you talking about the 3D models? Because the photographs, we photograph in camera raw because we have enough storage. But camera raw is different than taking like a JPEG or a TIFF with a big camera, because it actually, like, I can make a completely black photograph that like is like really, really underexposed, and I can like lighten it up, and you can actually see what I was taking a photograph of, and you can't do that with a TIFF or a JPEG. So it allows for, yeah, me to be a bad photographer.
And are you going to go back to Abydos?
That's the plan. They seem to like the work, so yeah, they want me to continue working this summer in New York, and they want me to come back next season, which will be fun.
What was your experience there? How did you felt?
It was amazing. It is Upper Egypt though, so it's very, very different from like Cairo, and I actually found that the biggest problem was how loudly I laughed. So, but other than that, I could adjust, got a little quieter. But it was amazing. It's beautiful, and you know, I work in contemporary technology. It was really amazing to actually like be thinking about these, like telling history, and like being a part of that process. I felt very small and like very insignificant in the storytelling of this particular area. It's just, yeah, it was amazing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So we can continue to speak about your project this year.